Today we're going to talk about the history and culture of Ayurveda. My name is John Immel. I'm the director of Joyful Belly Ayurveda, and this is what I look like. When you think of Ayurveda, what do you think of? Some people think of tasty food. I certainly do. And food lists for your body type. People think of exotic spices, and here you see a picture of turmeric. People think of glowing skin and beauty, and they may think of balance, serenity, contentment. They might think of longevity. They might think of Ayurveda as an exciting new wellness opportunity. Well, what do people think about Ayurveda in India? In India, Ayurveda is something that your grandparents do. It may be something that you grew up with, and it's considered to be traditional or conservative. So whereas Ayurveda is something very new and exotic here, it's something that the Indian youth may consider quaint or outdated. If grandma says to eat some particular food so that you feel better, the kids may roll their eyes and complain because they want to have McDonald's or fried vada pav, which is a tasty treat that you can get from street vendors in India, and they may not want to eat Ayurvedically like their grandma or grandpa says. But then they grow up, they get older, and they start to recognize the wisdom of Ayurveda, and then they try to tell their grandchildren, and their grandchildren don't want to hear it. So Ayurveda is new in the West and exotic, but kind of can be considered quaint or outdated or old or conservative in India. Of course, these days there's a resurgence in India of interest in Ayurveda, perhaps because of the resurgence in the West. Indians themselves are taking a new look at Ayurveda. Also, if you want to practice Ayurveda professionally in India, it requires 5.5 years of study. And so that's a really interesting difference. In the U.S., it's generally a 2-year program to practice Ayurveda professionally. And every year, the length of time required to study Ayurveda grows in the United States. So then, what is Ayurveda? What are the branches of Ayurveda? What is the culture of Ayurveda? What is the spirituality of Ayurveda? All these are really essential questions that we need to ask ourselves, and which we're going to discuss in today's presentation. Sometimes Ayurveda can feel like the Wild West. And I don't mean that just in the United States or around the world, even in India. I've gone to Ayurvedic conferences where quantum mechanics was discussed as an Ayurvedic thing. Now, I love quantum mechanics. It's a great thing to ponder. And I love physics. But in this presentation, no proof was offered that quantum mechanics falls under the domain of Ayurveda. And also, there was no clinical model offered for the application of quantum mechanics in a consultation. And so, while it was fascinating to hear the musings of the individual presenting that talk, I myself, wondered how does this even relate to Ayurveda and what we're trying to study. So practitioners will liberally incorporate wisdom from other modalities under the Ayurveda umbrella. And they'll say, oh, such and such a thing is Ayurvedic. And I think all practitioners do this. We certainly do this at Joyful Belly. And I think that's one of the great things that contributes to the development of Ayurveda is a certain flexibility that we have in Ayurveda to include anything that's healthy and helpful under the Ayurveda umbrella. But of course, there's a problem with that, is that it can undermine credibility of Ayurveda, and it also can dilute and distort Ayurveda as well. We can call anything Ayurvedic, it seems, in some circles, and often no attempt is made to prove statements made about Ayurveda. So it's, how do you determine whether something is Ayurvedic or not? Ayurveda is rarely evidence-based. It's highly individualized. So all those things can be good things, but it can also undermine credibility, and we have to be a little careful. Traditional Indian practitioners may resent this lack of orthodoxy in Ayurveda, and this dilemma of Ayurveda of what is Ayurvedic and what is not, is not just a dilemma in the West, but it's a dilemma in India, and it's been a dilemma in India for a long time. People have been debating this issue, and some traditional practitioners in India resent the lack of orthodoxy, and others love the freedom this offers. It's exactly the same as here, right? But still, we should ask the question, what exactly is Ayurveda? How do we know what is truly Ayurvedic? Is there a way to maintain an orthodoxy in Ayurveda as well as a credibility, to maintain orthodoxy and credibility, but still have creativity, innovation, and development? These are important questions. There are Ayurvedic fundamentalists, the only things that they include under the Ayurvedic umbrella are things that are in the ancient texts from 5,000 years ago. And anything after that, they don't consider Ayurvedic. And is that too rigid? Well, I don't know. So, but the student should be on guard. As a student, as a practitioner, you should always be, asking yourself that question. Is that Ayurvedic? A person's saying it's Ayurvedic, but is it? How do I think critically about that? How am I going to use that in a clinical practice? When should I use it and when should I not use it? Those are some fundamental questions that can help you avoid the improper application of Ayurveda. Well, what are some ways to determine whether something is Ayurvedic or not? Well, we could go back to the authoritative texts. We can call something Ayurvedic if it's in the classics, or if a well-respected Ayurvedic practitioner says that it's Ayurvedic, maybe we will consider more seriously whether it is Ayurvedic or not. Direct perception can tell us whether something is Ayurvedic or not, such as in a person's clinical experience. If you've had many, many clients and you've determined that, such a principle or an herb has been helpful for many of those clients, you may determine, oh, well, this is Ayurvedic, this is helpful. A third way to determine whether something is Ayurvedic is through inference, by application of the gunas, elements, tastes, and doshas. If you see lots of signs of heat, you can determine that a new disease is a heat disorder, and that will be through inference. So we have these three main methods of determining whether something is Ayurvedic. Testimony from authority, direct perception, or inference. So what is the classical definition of Ayurveda in the ancient texts? Well, the word Ayurveda itself literally translates to the science of life. Ayu equals life or longevity, and Veda equals knowledge or science. And here's a classic sutra from the Charaka Samhita, chapter 1, verse 41, that defines Ayurveda. And here I've offered a transliteration using the English alphabet, but it would be written using those Devanagari symbols on the right that you see in this photo. And how does this sutra go? I'll sing it for you so that you understand the poetic meter of the sutra. All of these Ayurvedic sutras in Sanskrit are written in poetic meter so that they're easy to memorize. And I memorized this sutra when I was a student. And so, I can kind of do it with my eyes closed. And I remember my friend Cheng and I going up into the hills of the Sandia Mountains in New Mexico with tablas and chanting this sutra over and over again. And it goes, Hita hitam sukam dukam ayustasya hita hitam manam cha tachya yatroktam Ayurveda sa uchyate. So there's a chant of that sutra, and you can hear the meter in it. It kind of rolls off the tongue very nicely. So what does it mean? It loosely translates to, this is not a literal translation, loosely translates to, Ayurveda is the science that describes the advantageous and disadvantageous, happy and unhappy states of life, as well as what is good and bad for life, its measurement, and life itself. So that word manam up there means measurement. Sukam, dukam, you might recognize some of those words. Means happiness or sadness. And you see the word ayu thrown in there. That means life. And sauchiate, that part means to describe or tell. So you can slowly break down the translation of that. I mentioned the Charaka Samhita just a minute ago, and the Charaka Samhita is part of the Great Triode, or Brihat Trayi. There's the Brihat Trayi and the Lagu Trayi, the Great Triode and the Light Triode, or the Lesser Triode. So the first and probably most authoritative text of Ayurveda is the Charaka Samhita. Now, the Charaka Samhita itself is derived from an older text that was lost, called the Agni Vesha Samhita. And now, earlier text is referred to in the Charaka Samhita. And the text was written around 8th century BC, or 2,800 years ago. And it's, like I said, it's lost. But the Charaka Samhita describes how the material used in that text was originally written by Agni Vesha, who was a legendary rishi. Or rishi just means sage, one of the ancient sages. And he was one of the 6 disciples of Punarvasu Atreya, who was also considered to be a rishi. And Punarvasu Atreya had 6 disciples, and each of these disciples went on to compose samhitas themselves, based on the teachings of Atreya. Well, after Agni Vesha wrote down the Agni Vesha Samhita, time passed, knowledge grew, and the Charaka Samhita was written down as a refinement. And the author of the Charaka Samhita is Charaka. This was written down around the 2nd century BC. There's some speculation whether Charaka and Patanjali, by the way, who wrote the Yoga Sutras, are the same person or not. And like I said, the Charaka Samhita is considered the most comprehensive and authoritative text on what Ayurveda is. It explains the logic and philosophy on which Ayurveda is based. And it focuses primarily on internal medicine, or Kaya Chikitsa. Kaya means body, Chikitsa means treatment. Everybody should know that word Chikitsa, because it's going to come up again and again throughout your Ayurvedic career, and also it may be on a test. So Kaya means body, so bodily treatment, and the internal medicine, this branch of Ayurveda, will focus on anatomy, diagnosis, treatment of disease, etc. And the Charaka Samhita covers preventative and curative aspects of health. It outlines the core concepts of Ayurveda, such as 3 doshas, Agni, Ama, etc. And here's some notes about the translation. The translation that you purchase, is, if you buy these books, is really important. And I would recommend this translation. There are some newer translations coming out as well, which may be good. But you really want to make sure you get a translation that is thorough, has great commentary. You're not just going to read the direct translation of the Sanskrit, but we need good commentary. And this version, I think really does a good job. The Sushruta Samhita is the second of the main classical texts. Sushruta was alive in the 6th century BC. Notice this is older than the Charaka Samhita. Sushruta was an ancient Indian surgeon and a pioneer. He was the father of Indian medicine, considered to be the father of Indian medicine, and it was very innovative, the Sushruta Samhita, outlining groundbreaking operations, including plastic surgery. Who would have thought that India had plastic surgery 2,600 years ago? But they did. They had nose reconstruction surgery. It's fascinating if you want to find out more info about that. But Sushruta, as far as I know, was the oldest surgeon, or just the first real written description we have of surgery on the human body. And he outlines method of dissection, methods of surgery. It's a really interesting to learn about the history of surgery. The last is the Ashtanga Hridayam. This is, I think of the Ashtanga Hridayam. It's the third ancient classic, and I think of this as much easier to read than Charaka or Sushruta. Sushruta is pretty hard to read. Charaka, a little easier. Ashtanga Hridayam, much easier. So this was written around the 7th century AD, making it about 1,300 years old, by Bhagbat. And it translates to the heart of the 8 branches of Ayurveda. In fact, when I say the word Ashtanga, many of you in the yoga world will will recognize that word, meaning 8 limbs. So, and Hrid means heart. So it's the heart of the 8 limbs. And 8 limbs of what? 8 limbs of Ayurveda. So the heart of the 8 branches of Ayurveda, or 8 limbs of Ayurveda, really what it means is it's the heart of medicine. So the Ashtanga Hridayam is the heart of medicine. And it outlines surgical and medical approaches. And also, again, in poetic meter. All of these are in poetic meter for easy memorization. And the Ashtanga Hridayam is mostly based on Charaka and Sushruta. Now I get to the lesser triad, the Lagu Trayi. Lagu means light. And these are the 3... these are also 3 classical texts, but they're considered secondary to Charaka, Sushruta, and Ashtanga Hridayam. And, these are considered to, again, be further refinement and condensing and trying to explain this more and more clearly. So they're in a way you could consider them to be not translations, but just trying to repeat this information in more easily understood language is one way of looking at it. But they also expand on the knowledge as well. And you'll notice these are later texts. So the Madhava Nidanam is written by Acharya Madhavakara around 7th to 8th century AD. And it outlines the disease process and classifies numerous diseases. It's considered to be the best compilation on pathogenesis and pathology, and it outlines 5 tools of examination, the Nidana Panchaka, including trial and error, method of diagnosis, which I think is a really awesome technique and tool that we have in Ayurveda called Upashaya, the causes or Nidana, the prodromal signs and symptoms, Purvarupa, the signs and symptoms of disease, Rupa, and disease pathogenesis, Samprapti. Then we have the Sharangadhara Samhita in 13th century. This is only 700 years old. Includes a lot of pharmacological formulations and also an outline of the pharmacological actions, Dipana, Pachana, Shodhana. We have herbal actions in Western herbology as well, and so great to study those. The Sharangadhara Samhita is the first presentation of pulse diagnosis in Ayurveda. It explains panchakarma techniques. Then we have the Bhava Prakasha, around 6th 15th century AD. This is only 400 years old. And it talks about the origins of Ayurveda, basic principles, anatomy, daily routine, seasonal routine, etc. Usage of many different substances. I think this is a useful text to look up food, plants, herbs, and minerals. And it has lots of medical recipes and formulas from various ancient texts all put into one place. So all of these, the Brihatrayi and the Laghutrayi, these 6 texts, really everyone should have all of them who is going to practice Ayurveda on a professional level. And here's another modern Ayurveda resource that I really think is a great one, is by Gogte, Ayurvedic Pharmacology and Therapeutic Uses of Medicinal Plants. It's a really great text, big text, has a lot of the plants and herbs and great descriptions of all of them, and using drawing upon information from many different sources. Really great book, I think essential resource. So by Gogte. All right, what are the 8 limbs of Ayurveda? The Ashtanga Ayurveda, as opposed to Ashtanga Yoga, right? Ashtanga Ayurveda. What are the 8 branches? What are the 8 limbs? They are different areas of specialization in Ayurveda. And in general, I think every practitioner should have some specialty because that will give them an expertise. That will give them an area where they can build their confidence. It will help them build their practice, build their business, and also provide a higher quality of care. So we have internal medicine, or Kaya Chikitsa. I mentioned that word earlier. Chikitsa means treatment. Kaya means body. And that includes internal medicine, Ayurvedic diagnosis and treatment of disease, management of Agni, the doshas, the Sotamsi, etc. And Charaka Samhita is the primary text for internal medicine, or Kaya Chikitsa. Second branch is pediatrics, gynecology, and obstetrics, called Bala Chikitsa. Bala means child. And so treatment of the child. And that includes fertility and reproduction, pregnancy, childbirth, children's health. And the primary text there is the Kashyapa Samhita. Then we have psychiatry, called Graha Chikitsa, including psychosomatic disorders, or disorders without a known cause, meaning idiopathic disorders. Then we have ear, nose, throat, and ophthalmology, which is Shalakya Tantra. And that includes treatment of diseases affecting the orifices of the head. Surgery, or Shalya Tantra. And toxicology, or Bisha Chikitsa. Bisha means poison. So that includes insect bites, animal stings, and toxic exposure. We have geriatrics and rejuvenation therapies. We also have aphrodisiacs, fertility and virility enhancers, called Vajikarana. So that includes that summarizes the 8 branches of Ayurveda. And next we want to talk about the main components of Ayurveda. Again, giving this sort of broad overview of what Ayurveda is. Ayurveda, the things that we study in this course and the main tools or components of Ayurveda, it's worth just reviewing them quickly in one place so that you get to see the whole umbrella of Ayurveda, almost on one page. Not exactly on one page, but just sort of all together in one place. So we have to start, when we talk about the Ayurvedic approach, we have to start with qualitative assessment of things. In Western medicine, they're measuring actual substances and describing the atoms and the biochemicals and that kind of thing. And that's that sort of reductionist model is the model of Western medicine. In Ayurveda, we do qualitative assessments. Instead of measuring blood sugar levels, we assess the qualities of things. So we classify different qualities a person may have into different types and categories. And these types and categories are not just used to classify the person, but also the imbalance and the types of treatments. So if we see that a pitta person, that's a classification of the person, has a hot imbalance, then we'll treat them with a cool cucumber. So notice we're using this qualitative method at each step of the way, classifying the person, the imbalance, and the treatment using elements, gunas, tastes, and doshas. So hot is one of the gunas. Gunas are nothing more than hot, cold, oily, dry, slimy, rough, dense, liquid, etc. All the different qualities that we use. The elements are ether, air, fire, water, earth. The tastes are sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, astringent. The doshas are vata, pitta, kapha. I didn't give all the gunas. Maybe I should. I'll just go through them briefly just so that you can hear them all. It's just heavy, light, sharp, dull, hot, cold, oily, dry, slimy, rough, dense, liquid, soft, hard, mobile, stable, subtle, gross, and clear versus cloudy. We should all memorize and be able to rattle off elements, gunas, taste, doshas very quickly, because in every single session with a client, you want to look for signs and symptoms of elements, gunas, tastes, and doshas. And so every time I meet with a client, I rattle those off right in order. Ether, air, fire, water, earth, heavy, light, sharp, dull, hot, etc., and go right down the list so that in less than 30 seconds, I can assess all of those different qualities. So first step was the qualitative assessment, looking at just how we describe the quality of things. Now, these are the things in the body that we're going to assess. We're going to, Ayurveda breaks up or looks at the anatomy of the body in a slightly different way than Western medicine. And here are the main components of anatomy in Ayurveda. We have Agni, Ama, which is the digestive fire and metabolic wastes. Then we have the Saptadhatu, the 7 dhatus, which are Rasa, Rakta, Mamsa, Meda, Asti, Maja, and Shukra. And that roughly translates to blood plasma, the red part of the blood, muscle, fat, bone, marrow, and reproductive systems. So we're going to look at the 7 dhatus, and then the management systems, the Sortamsi, that includes all of the dhatus, plus prana, ana, ambu, which is prana is your respiratory system and the kind of life spark or energy in the body. And ana is the food system, basically your digestive tract. And then ambu is the water management system, including kidney and various other organs in the body. And then in the Sortamsi, we also have, in addition to Saptadhatu and Prana, Ana, Ambu, we also have the 3 malas, Parisha, Sveda, and Mutra, the basically pooping, urinating, and sweat. And we also have Stanya, the breast tissue, Raja, which is the menstruation, covering menstruation, and the health of the uterus. And so we have these different Sortamsis, the Dhatus, Agni and Ama, and we also have the subdoshas. I put the subdoshas here instead of on the previous slide because it starts to get a little bit more into the anatomy when you're getting into the subdoshas. Not exactly. I think a good argument could be made for putting it on the previous slide as well. But we have 5 subdoshas of each dosha, giving us 15 subdoshas in all. So when you look at all of these together, we see that we have lots of different ways to qualitatively assess something. We have lots of different things that we're trying to assess. And then we have the assessment of disease itself, including some propti and pathogenesis of the disease, the development of the disease. We have causes of disease. We have how to set up an Ayurveda practice, right? So we have disease assessment and the clinical encounter that has to be included under Ayurveda as well. And then we have our different treatments. So diet, lifestyle, herbs. Shamana Chikitsa, which is the palliative therapies, the more gentle therapies, and the cleansing therapies, which are a little bit more harsh. Shamana Shodhana. And palliative therapy is going for a walk or getting some nice exercise. And a Shodhana Chikitsa, well, nasya or a nasal administration of oils is actually not that harsh in most cases, but other cleansing techniques are a little bit more harsh, and that could be necessary. Oh, by the way, here's a nice picture of harataki. That herb in the center photo there is harataki. Great herb in Ayurveda. So what else in Chikitsa, in treatments? We have rejuvenation or rasayana. And there's a picture of Chyawanprash, famous Ayurvedic rasayana. That's a jam, really tasty jam, given to kids and adults alike. And then we have our aphrodisiacs, Vajikarana. So what are those main components of Ayurveda? We have qualitative assessment. We have the anatomy of the body. We have disease assessment and the clinical encounter. We have treatments. And that is in a way, that's like the basic overview of the whole program, of the whole course that you've been learning about. All right, let's talk a little bit about the culture of Ayurveda and the context of Ayurveda. Ayurveda in India is part of the folk culture. You learn it from your parents and grandparents, somewhat grudgingly at times, until you grow up and recognize the wisdom of it. And it includes, most Indian cooking has some Ayurvedic components to it, some Ayurvedic wisdom built into it. So it includes the use of Indian food, spices, herbs, etc. in India. Of course, any food and any food culture can benefit from Ayurveda's approach. It doesn't just have to be Indian food. But it's interesting to note that turmeric is in so many different Indian dishes, yet it has no real taste. So we know that people aren't adding turmeric to food because it's tastier. It's pretty much being added because of its medicinal value. There's a lot of Ayurveda includes a lot of lifestyle practices that people may grow up with, and some of the ways that the lifestyle and food and recipes of India, people do them without even knowing that they're Ayurvedic. They've just become so part of the culture. And Ayurveda may be practiced alongside yoga in ashrams and monasteries in India. You know, if you go to the monastery, you see that they're doing Ayurveda there, they're doing yoga there, they're meditating. So Ayurveda is incorporated with the spiritual life of monks and also of lay people who are spiritual. Ayurveda colleges in India. Here's a picture of one. The BAMS programs, a BAMS degree of India is 5.5 years of study. So they, and so sometimes I think some of the BIMS students will look at American schools and say, oh, they're insufficient. They are not. The programs aren't as long as our programs are overseas in India. However, I would also say that I think that. I love the American style of teaching, right? One of the things that we do in the United States in teaching is we always ask the question, why? We want to know the why. We're not just going to take it for face value. We want to ask those questions, and so I think that that the American schools bring something really great to the table, which is that question, why? And also, I love the innovations of American teaching, and I think that there's really something great going on with American education, and so I think we have a lot to offer. Although it is true that in conversations I've had with BAMS students, many times they're they'll say things like, okay, well, they're kind of assume that they have more knowledge of Ayurveda. In many cases, it's true and deserved. They have done extensive studies, and we should definitely be respectful of that. And also, there's a lot we know too. It's not always the case that the BIMS students know more. So anyway, you'll probably run across some of those politics of Ayurveda as you advance in your career. So Ayurveda hospitals in India, Ayurveda is practiced in Ayurveda hospitals. And then in some areas, Ayurveda is included in the Western style hospitals as well. So it's integrated. And Rebecca, who did some studying of Ayurveda in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan doctors were saying that in the hospitals, they'll just pick the most effective treatment. A client walks through the door, and if Ayurveda is the most effective treatment, they'll send them to the Ayurveda wing of the hospital. Otherwise, they'll go to the Western wing of the hospital. And so they're just using it for its strengths and benefits. And that's exactly how Ayurveda should be used. And here's an example of an Indian Ayurveda practitioner taking the pulse of someone. And then here's another picture here. Maybe I should have mentioned this earlier because it's probably what people are wondering about. But this is a leech who's doing bloodletting therapy on this swollen area of this man's head or face. And, most people, when they look at that, they think of that as pretty gross and probably a little exotic and a little weird, right? But the fact is that California hospitals these days in the United States are also using leeches because they're effective. And they excrete blood-thinning compounds when they're sucking the blood. So they pull out the heat and then improve the circulation of the area. They've been used for diabetic ulcers. It's really fascinating to see how the use of leeches is coming to modern Western practice, Western medicine. So in India, there may be Panchakarma centers, and here you see these little huts for Kaya Kalpa, taking a little break from life, a little hermitage there where they will do cleansing therapies and get some peace and quiet for a little while. And you see here someone getting Shirodhara, or oil being poured onto their head. Actually, I can't actually see the oil hitting their head. It looks like maybe that was a fancy photo of photo op where the oil is not actually getting in her hair there. I don't see it coming in. But anyway, it's just a photo. All right. Also, in India, there may be Ayurveda may be practiced in the context of a spa or Ayurvedic massage. And here you see an Ayurvedic massage with two practitioners. Notice they're working together symmetrically on either side. That's a technique of massage in Ayurveda where you have two practitioners at the same time. And also you see a person here on the right-hand photo receiving marma treatment, pressure on the acupressure points or marma points. Here we see some photos of individual practitioners in India. A Indian pharmacy. I've purchased Ayurvedic herbs at numerous pharmacies like this in my travels through India, and it's great. You can get all the different Ayurvedic formulations. It's lots of fun checking them all out. And there's Ayurveda publishers in India, also in the United States, right? These elements are also here in the United States too. We have people writing Ayurveda books. We have people dispensing Ayurvedic herbs and selling them to the public, etc. Ayurveda, as I said too, is integrated with the spiritual life of many practitioners. And that brings us to the next question: is Ayurveda Hindu? Here's a picture of Krishna, one of the gods in the Hindu pantheon, and a picture of the lotus flower on the right. Lotus flower is a symbol of enlightenment because enlightenment continues to unfold petal by petal in that model, and the lotus flower has many, many petals. So first, when we're asking the question, is Ayurveda Hindu, we have to remember that Hindu is a word coined by foreigners. It's not actually it was not actually a word in India, coined by the Hindus themselves. It originally simply meant people living near the Indus River, the Indus River Valley civilization. And the term is used currently to describe a really wide range of beliefs of people who live in India. So every different region of India has different gods that they worship and different philosophies, and it's just you can't really you can't really lump them all together, but at the same time, we need some words to talk about this, and there are some commonalities too. So I think the word is a relevant word, and Indian people themselves do use that word now too. So I think it's a useful word, but we should just know that it's describing many, many different things, not just a single orthodox practice. And Ayurveda developed in the culture of the Indus River Valley, and so it's part of the Vedic culture, part of Hindu culture, and the Ayurvedic texts do make references to Hindu gods, especially in the introduction to several chapters. And medicine and spirituality were linked in some periods of Indian history, and they were separate in others. But there's little integral to the practice of Ayurveda that is Hindu. As you go through it, you can pretty much do all of Ayurveda without reference or use of Hindu philosophy or worldview. And I think that most Ayurveda practitioners believe that Ayurveda can be practiced by anyone of any faith, and I believe that as well. I think that after looking at it, especially as I myself am a Christian and not Hindu, I consider myself to be, I'm very interested and passionate about my faith, and I've, really looked through these texts to see, is there something that would be heretical to my faith as a Christian if practicing Ayurveda, and I really can't find much there. There are some ways in which some of Indian philosophy has some ideas that you could say were borrowed from Indian philosophy, like the concept of balance itself is, you could say that is borrowed from Sankhya philosophy or Buddhist style or yoga style way of doing things. But the fact is that balance itself is considered healthy in every world religion and every faith. And so you can't really, it's not just a concept that's limited to those philosophies. So it's very interesting, I think, to study how to bring Ayurveda to other cultures and other faiths, especially, because that creates such a great opportunity for improving the health of everybody in society. And so I think it's a really interesting topic. Anyway, it's a topic I'm interested in. And so, yes, there's little integral to the practice of Ayurveda that is Hindu, and at the same time, many practitioners of Ayurveda promote various Hindu-related beliefs. And that could include different theories of meditation, that could include chanting Hindu prayers before and after classes, as some schools do. They may chant to Ganesha or chant to Dhanvantari, who's considered the god of Ayurveda. Or they may chant Om in an Ayurveda class or in a yoga class, right? And these are using mudras, right? Sitting in meditation with your hands in a certain posture, or those are some things that you find in yoga classes or different Ayurveda schools. And altogether, this creates, in general, a strong Hindu identity in the Ayurveda community. I remember going to a yoga class, and there was this MC Yogi, song playing in the background, talking about Ganesha, rapping about Ganesha. So, these Hindu, this Hindu spirituality has been integrated with rap music and in some of the yoga classes. And so, yeah, there is a strong Hindu identity in the Ayurveda community and the yoga community. And of course, why? Why is it that when you go to an Ayurveda practitioner, somehow, some way, spirituality gets included into it? Because it's essential. Because in a way, spirituality is essential to health. You can't really separate health from one's spiritual beliefs. You can try, and there are some practitioners that have relatively more secular practice, but most practitioners do have some spiritual thing that they integrate into their practice. And so is Ayurveda spiritual is a really important question. And here I have, symbols of various different faiths: Islam, Judaism, Christianity, meditation, for, as a symbol of Buddhism or yoga. And so, is Ayurveda spiritual in nature? Well, Ayurveda certainly recommends a spiritual life. It is hard to separate spirituality from health. Why? Because your worldview affects your behavior. What you believe and your beliefs about life in general, those affect your decisions, right? We all make our decisions based upon our beliefs. Every decision is based upon some kind of belief that we have about something. It could be a really simple belief like celery is healthy for me, or it could be a highly spiritual belief such as this is who God is, right? And so we make essential choices in our life based on beliefs, preferences, and worldview. And some of those essential choices include our relationships to family. What do we think about marriage? What do we think about our parents? What do we think about our children? Those are heavily influenced by our beliefs. Our ambitions, career, mission, and purpose in life is heavily influenced by our spiritual beliefs. The community that we belong to, as soon as you choose a spirituality or a set of beliefs, whether they're political beliefs or religious beliefs or whatever, you are joining a community. And unless you have some kind of belief system, it's actually hard to have a community. Communities form around our different worldviews in general. Our beliefs influence our decision of who to marry, and who to have children with, when to have sex, when not to have sex. Do you believe in chastity or no, or celibacy, or casual sex? That's gonna really influence how your lifestyle, and gonna really influence your health as a result. So is spiritual study too abstract? Is philosophy too boring? Is it a bunch of mumbo jumbo? Well, Ayurveda says it's important not to overlook these things. And as we grow in wisdom in general, we hopefully become happier as a result. And that's part of our journey through life. So specific spiritual tools of healing are largely beyond the scope of this course. And we also want people to have the flexibility to incorporate their spiritual faith into Ayurveda, so that we can bring Ayurveda to the whole community. So even though those specific spiritual methods are beyond the scope of this course, it's unequivocal that spirituality is important to health. And so I would contend that Ayurveda is fundamentally spiritual. So what does Ayurveda say about spirituality beyond non-specific statements? As I mentioned before, because Ayurveda was formed in the Hindu culture, there are occasional references to specific Hindu-related beliefs, and it's important to remember that the tradition of Ayurveda was formed in a culture, as I said before, that Hinduism itself is an amalgam of many different practices and beliefs. And so there's There's Jainism, Buddhism, which some consider to be an offshoot of Hinduism. And there's Sikhism, etc., etc. And in India, there's always been some friction and tension between different faiths, also between people who have taken an orthodox approach and a heterodox approach. Orthodox means conforming to tradition and what is traditionally accepted as right or true, and heterodox is non-conforming. And it's orthodoxy is not so much about tradition, but it's about being can be just more strict interpretation, in the sense that a person goes deep into the philosophy and in a very passionate way, and really tries to understand what is the truth. And heterodox is a little bit more okay, well, let's not take this as seriously, and keep it a little bit more light. And so, people tend to be on a spectrum as individuals along that line. So Ayurveda developed within the culture of some cultural and religious friction between orthodoxy and heterodoxy, between various different faiths. And spirituality in India can sometimes seem as diverse, varied, and chaotic as the city streets themselves. And spiritual diversity, of course, is a modern reality that's not just in India, but in every country. The world has gotten smaller, and there's lots of different people practicing different faiths, often within the same community. And so, as we ask our questions, it sort of forces everybody to ask the question, which beliefs should I adopt? Which beliefs are good for me? Which will lead to happy outcomes? Which authentically lead to God? And which do not? There's some fundamental questions that everyone has to ask themselves on their spiritual journey. But again, what does Ayurveda say about spirituality? Well, the classical texts all say that Ayurveda had a divine source, that it was transmitted from the gods to the Maharishis or the Rishis or the ancient sages, and then brought to the public. And so Ayurveda's origins, the ancient texts claim that they or give a sort of mythological account of Ayurveda's origins. And this is pretty typical of the time period that it was written. And, by claiming Ayurveda's origins as divine, really what the ancient authors were doing was integrating Ayurveda into the tradition. Instead of saying, hey, we have this new thing that's a break from tradition, or challenging the tradition, it's saying, oh, no, we're developing something that's a part of the tradition. We're developing something that belongs in the tradition. So it's not a break from tradition, but a part of the tradition. And so the ancient texts say that Ayurveda comes from the gods, and Ayurveda. The tradition of Ayurveda, of course, has expanded over the years, and knowledge has accumulated over time as well. So two perspectives on how Ayurveda developed. The first is that it's from a divine source that I just mentioned. And in some cases, this had the benefit of making Ayurveda or integrating Ayurveda into the society of the time. But some drawbacks of this model is that it's a little more fundamentalist, right? That it limits the introduction of new ideas. It only refers back to the original teachings of the divine source for knowledge, and so there are practitioners, as I said earlier, who, if it's not in the ancient texts, they do not consider it Ayurvedic, and I think that can be very limiting in the case of Ayurveda. So the second perspective on how Ayurveda developed was that the pioneers of Ayurveda used their five senses to observe nature, and from that created the science of Ayurveda. In this sense, Ayurveda describes our natural relationship to the world around us. It's almost like these ancient sages or intelligent folks. They observed nature, they observed our relationship to it, and they came up with a model to basically work with and understand and use and create balance using our natural relationship to the world around us. And I think there's a lot of merit in that second approach as well. So, but there are some drawbacks too. Just as in the first perspective on Ayurveda's origins can limit the flexibility and innovation in Ayurveda, the second perspective, where Ayurveda is basically formed from what you observe, really allows anything that is observed to be lumped under the umbrella of Ayurveda. In some cases, Ayurveda can become anything that anyone thinks it is, and that there's clearly some problems with that. So perhaps a third approach or a third perspective on Ayurveda's origins is that it's both divinely inspired and developed by humans. And of course, anything good is, at least this is my belief anyway, is that anything good must come from God on some level, right? And of course, we want to participate in the development of good things as human beings. And so I tend to think that Ayurveda probably had some divine inspiration as well as human development. I hope to be a human that develops Ayurveda also. And Kimberly relates that knowledge from the classics is foundational, but how you apply it is constantly changing based upon clients. And the example she gives is autoimmune disorders. Well, there really isn't any classical reference for autoimmune disorders in the ancient texts. You can find some indirect references to things that are like autoimmune disorders, but that there are new diseases that come out, and we need to apply Ayurveda to those diseases. And so, we go back to the classics as our foundation, but then apply it innovatively. So, Ayurveda does draw its knowledge from the 6 Indian philosophies, or the Shad Darshan. Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Yoga, and Vedanta are the 6 basic philosophies in India. And the idea was that, these philosophies would be comprehensive and describe all philosophies. Of course, I think there's a lot of philosophical innovation that's possible outside of these 6 systems as well. But Ayurveda does draw and use these 6 different philosophies, and we'll learn a bit about those. All right, what about Ayurveda culture in the West and the cultural environment of the alternative health movement in general? Well, alternative health in the U.S. is practiced in the context of one-to-one private consultations, in spas, in integrative clinics, cleanse workshops, hospitals. I mentioned before that there are companies that sell herbs, people writing books, etc. All of that is included under the alternative health industry in the United States. But there are some issues bringing Ayurveda into the mainstream culture. And some of those are due to the mainstream culture rejecting Ayurveda for the wrong reasons. And some of those are things that we do as an industry that can be self-isolating as well. And we have to really look at both of those factors. Well, one issue that I think is legitimate, that is an obstacle to adoption of Ayurveda in the mainstream, is the lack of evidence-based clinical trials. And that's probably the biggest factor there. And also some skepticism around Ayurveda is unjustified as well. But what about the things that we may be doing as an industry to prevent the adoption of Ayurveda? That's also very interesting to me, and I think should be interesting to everyone as you think about how you're going to make your practice appealing to the community that you serve. So there's a cultural, political, and spiritual divide that sometimes can prevent adoption of Ayurveda. And what's a cultural one? Well, Indian food. Sometimes people associate Ayurveda with Indian food or these exotic spices, and people in your community may not be interested in that, in changing the kinds of foods they eat. And there is a way to enjoy American food Ayurvedically, or to approach American food, or whatever food that you grew up with in whatever country you're in. Ayurveda can be used to eat healthfully in the context of your current food culture. It doesn't have to be Indian food, but sometimes it's associated with Indian food, and then people may think, "Oh, that's exotic. I'm not really into that." That can happen. Political divide. Well, the alternative health movement in general is very liberal politically, and I think that's true of the Ayurvedic industry as well. Why? Because most people in the alternative health movement are early adopters of a new way of thinking about health, and so it tends to be liberal instead of conservative. It's considered non-traditional in at least in the country that I live in, the United States, and so the individuals who are practicing it are early adopters of a new way of thinking, and so it makes them more liberal. Can also be a spiritual divide, right? If you're certain individuals in the community are going to the church up the corner, or to a mosque or synagogue or something along those lines, and then they go into your clinical practice and they see statues of Buddha, or or they go into yoga class and they're chanting Om, or doing various forms of meditation or mala beads, or etc. They may be concerned, like, am I doing something heretical to my tradition, or is this wrong for me to do it? And even if whatever they're doing is not wrong, they may just not know, and so they may be apprehensive to adopt it, and so some of those things can be barriers to adoption of Ayurveda by your community. And also, it's interesting to note that the alternative health industry has their own taboos, right? That any community, any way of life has its own taboos and things that, that it disagrees with, or, so, if you went to a yoga class and at the end of yoga class, you kind of say to the class, "Oh, hey, everybody, let's go to McDonald's after class," right? Like, nobody is going. I think that there would be cultural and social pressure against saying something like that in most yoga classes I've been to. No, and I'm not saying there's not a legitimate reason for that, right? McDonald's may be unhealthy, and so people who are going to yoga don't want to do something unhealthy. Nevertheless, it is kind of like a taboo, also in the culture, and there can be social pressure against other things as well, against organized religion. There can be a pressure against eating meat. There can be pressure to be open-minded to every new idea, as if all change is progress. When, not every change is progress. But there can be these kind of social pressures in the alternative health industry. Perhaps some of those social pressures are good, perhaps not. But the fact is that it can create a cultural divide, or a political divide, or a spiritual divide, and that can prevent adoption of Ayurveda to some of these communities that really need it. So, I consider our job to bring Ayurveda to the whole community. Not every individual, of course. You have the community that you bring it to, and I have the communities that I bring it to. But as a whole, or as an industry, we want to bring Ayurveda to everyone because it is healthy and helpful. So how do we have to ask ourselves as an industry how to reach across these cultural divisions. Even if your practice serves a particular community, as an industry, we do have to figure out how to serve everyone. And so we have to ask ourselves fundamental questions. Are we alienating any groups that could benefit from Ayurveda? How can we get Ayurveda to transcend political and religious boundaries? Can Can people who voted differently from you in the last election benefit from Ayurveda? Yes. How are you going to get them in your clinical practice? Well, if by appreciating them, by appreciating their intelligence, even if you disagree. I think that there's this tendency to think that the other side, whatever the other side means to you, is dumb or stupid, or or that they blind, and how can they possibly not see this political truth that I believe in, or whatever, right? That's the tendency that people think. And instead of that, we've got to appreciate others who think differently. People who voted differently from you in the last election, spend some time in meditation on maybe they have a point. Maybe there is something that, that they're trying to communicate that is valuable, even if you still disagree with their approach as a whole. And so, we should be willing to learn from others, even others we disagree with. It's great to learn from people you disagree with. That is a great leap forward every time you can do that. So everyone can benefit from Ayurveda if you're willing to meet them where they're at. All right. Well, so what did we talk about today? We talked about the definition of Ayurveda. We talked about the classical texts. We talked about the historical context of Ayurveda, the culture of Ayurveda in India, the alternative health culture in the United States, and some spirituality. What is Ayurveda spiritual, and what is the spiritual culture of Ayurveda? And we talked about some ways that we could possibly do better as an industry to reach out to other communities. So all of that. And one more thing we talked about in today's lecture: the basic main components of Ayurveda: qualitative assessment, anatomy of the body, disease assessment, the clinical encounter, and treatments, so that we have a broad overview of the culture and of Ayurveda and what Ayurveda is. I hope this has been helpful, folks, and look forward to our next talk.